So welcome everyone. My name is Katie Wysocki and I'm the Assistant Director in the Career Enrichment Network. Today is our second day of Liberal Arts Career Week and we're so glad you could join us. The workshop this afternoon is a guide to graduate school. Dave Fortna is a 2007 Penn State graduate who has earned his degree in crime, law, and justice, now criminology. He also holds a Master of Education in Higher Ed Management from Pitt and is currently working toward his Doctor of Education in Educational Leadership at Duquesne. Dave joined Duquesne University in August of 2018 as the Director of Graduate Enrollment Services, where he coordinates and manages day-to-day graduate enrollment services office operations while serving as the primary customer relations management graduate liaison and primary university-wide graduate program recruiter. When working with prospective students, customer service and advising is at the core of his interaction. He aids the prospective student through the application process while engaging in conversations around program fit. Prior to Duquesne, Dave spent 7 years at Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh serving in career development and graduate admission roles, as well as 2 years as an operations manager for Norfolk Southern Railroad. Dave started his Penn State journey at the Wilkes-Barre campus, where he was on the men's soccer team and involved in CCSG and Thon. At University Park, he remained involved in CCSG and Thon, dancing in 2007, the first year in the BJC. He met his wife during their senior year, and they were married at the Eisenhower Chapel in 2011. And he has a 4-year-old, and we were just talking about that. Our kids are both going to go to Penn State. So with that, Dave, thank you so much for being here. I will turn it over to you.
All right, there we go. Let me share my screen. All right, the typical, we're good? Okay, awesome. Katie, thank you for the introduction. Thank you everyone for joining. Zoom's horrible because I can't actually see you, but thank you. Please do engage through this. Katie's gonna be monitoring the chat, so feel free to ask questions along the way. I typically try to make these pretty interactive, so we will do our best. These are awesome, so congratulations. Thanks for stepping in today. When I was at Penn State, I don't think anything like this existed. At least we didn't hear about it, if it did. So I'm glad you're here. We're going to go through, talk a little bit about some trends, talk about the application process, and then I really want to turn this over to answer your questions as well. So just jumping in to this, talking a little bit about some of the trends in grad admissions. Some of this has been happening before the pandemic, some of it's a result of the pandemic. So I'm just going to talk through some of these and, feel free to chime in at any point. So GRE, GMAT, LSAT, test optional, what does that look like? So prior to the pandemic, a lot of more liberal arts programs were questioning the validity of the GRE, the efficacy of the GRE, and sort of some of those biases that we see in standardized testing. The pandemic has really pushed us in a few directions. So for a time, the testing services weren't available because you couldn't get to the testing site. So a lot of programs went test optional. As a result, they did not see a change in their the performance of their graduate students. So they decided to maintain test optional or eliminate them altogether. GRE is the most common for liberal arts students really not pursuing law school or things like that. And that's the most common option for seeing test optional or it being waived altogether. Some other things that have come out of it, which you'll talk a little bit later, I'm not sure if Penn State does this, but the LSAT, right? So some programs, some institutions will actually accept the GRE or the GMAT in place of the LSAT, especially if you're pursuing a dual degree option, maybe with the business school, MBA, JD combo. So when it comes to test scores and submitting them, you really want to dive into the school specifically and the program. The way I try to explain it, especially with the GRE, GMAT's typically required for all business schools, right? And they have to actually take a certain amount of GMAT tests for their rankings. GRE is really looked at the more technical the program. So if you're thinking statistics, if you're thinking a math program, computer science, anything more in the STEM fields, you're going to typically see the GRE stand as a requirement. If you're looking at history or psychology or communications, things along those lines, you might see the GRE be either test optional or taken off the table altogether. Program funding limitations have really just ramped up since COVID hit, and this is really, and we'll get into this in the next couple points. This has really taken hold more so at master's level programs. So historically, you could sometimes find master's programs, especially in the social sciences, history, liberal arts, philosophy, things like that, that would offer funding to attend their graduate program, either through assistantships, research opportunities, or just straight program funding. And we'll talk a little bit later about the different types of funding at the graduate level. But what we've seen on the graduate side of things is the program funding is really pulled back for master students to offset and help some of the funding needs on the PhD and doctoral level, because they're here longer, they've got teaching responsibilities and research responsibilities. So when you're considering grad school, you really want to consider how you're going to pay for grad school, especially if your options are, or your direction, excuse me, is a master's straight away, or if you don't have the option for a PhD and you need the master's in order to get there. So, funding limitations have really increased. A couple other things, the next two kind of go together. Some doctoral programs have actually gone on hiatus, right? So basically they've taken a step back again because of funding issues and said, you know what, we're not going to admit for the next year, 2 years. Sometimes in some cases it's living on a little bit beyond that. Something we were talking about before this call, the webinar started, we saw this in clinical psychology. So this goes into increased competition. Because of program hiatuses last year in psychology, specifically clinical, that increased the competition. What I mean by that is historically, so Duquesne, we're typically getting about 125 or so applications. Another school that we're close with, IUP, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, they are typically getting about 200 or so applications for their clinical psych program. We bring in 7 students a year, again, program funding based. IUP brings in about 15 a year for their program. Last year, because of the hiatus that several schools went on, we decided to continue enrolling. We saw our program applications go from about 120-ish, we'll call it, to north of 200 applications for the same 7 seats. IUP saw similar increases, right? So basically what that means is increased competition. So it's harder to get into some of these programs. In cases like this, we'll often go into what your goals are. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but right now I'll say, if you're interested in psychology and going into or looking at another program that maybe you're seeing trends where they're on hiatus elsewhere, but you have a school in mind, look at what other options exist. When we think about clinical psychology, do you want to be a research clinician in an academic sense, or do you want to be helping patients, right? One-on-one. In that case, I would talk to you about going to our clinical mental health counseling program or our marriage couple counseling or addictions counseling program, right? And you become a licensed counselor instead of going the PhD route. Maybe school psychology is an option within the field of education, right? If you want to work with children. So there's a lot of options. But that increased competition that was brought on by the pandemic has carried over into other fields as well. Last year, law schools, and I'm sure as Katie mentioned, there's talk later, last year law schools saw record numbers of applications. It's balanced out a little bit this year, but a lot of higher ranked schools, even Duquesne's law school, since we're have such a high bar passage rate, we're still seeing really high application numbers compared to past years. Business schools, MBA programs really shot up this past couple of years, and they're continuing to boom. And doctoral programs, again, because you're seeing programs close or go on hiatus, we're seeing bigger increases in competition for doctoral programs. I don't say that to dissuade you from pursuing those. I just say you may want to, if you've got 3 target schools, you may want to start coming up with, your plan B schools as well. So what are some of your other options in other areas, or, talking with Katie and the team in the Career Network to see what other pathways may exist for you to achieve your academic and professional goals. This one you're living it right now, modes of delivery. So being in online, being in person, being hybrid, being all 3 in one semester in some cases. So flexibility is really key. A lot of schools are trying to go back in person because we see the value of that, but it is something to be cognizant of and sort of roll with the punches there. The last one I'll talk about, and then we'll move on to application and all of that, unless there's questions, is there's been an increase in schools developing and promoting accelerated programs. So what I mean by that is you could stay at Penn State and pursue a 5th-year master's option. Typically, you're going to need to start planning this in your junior year at least, so that you can take the necessary courseworks and work out a schedule to actually accomplish it. But there's a huge cost savings. It benefits the institution that you're at, but it allows you to pursue that master's, gain some more practical experience in that field, allows you more internship time, more shadowing time, more networking opportunity, and you're continuing to earn that master's. So we've started to see that at Duquesne. We've seen that in the market generally. I know Penn State has this option with several of their programs. There used to, at one time, even when I was going to grad school in 2010, I guess I went to grad school, 2009 or 10, whatever it was. The idea, as I was talking to folks, 'cause I had applied to Penn State, and people were like, well, you shouldn't really go to Penn State. You want to go to a different school because you already got your Penn State experience. You need to look elsewhere. That is sort of gone now, right? You'll have some old, if you're talking to a more senior faculty member, they may advise you, oh, you should go to different schools, that diversity of education, diversity of experience. And that, depending on where you're going, that might make sense. But for a master's degree, it's really to push you to the next level. So I would encourage you to look at those options for the accelerated. Huge cost savings, huge time savings. So those are very important when you're talking about return on investment. Katie, any questions?
I have one. Can go back to the testing options as well as the idea of this is a dual degree, but the student is asking, it might be specific to university.
Yeah.
Do you need the GMAT and the LSAT for a JD MBA dual track program? So for these dual programs, are we seeing this similar testing going on?
Yeah, so great question. And that is very school specific. So some institutions will accept just one of them, right? So I can tell you for Duquesne, if you're applying, so you have to apply separately. You have to apply for the law school and you have to apply for a business school separately. But our law school requires the LSAT. They'll only accept the LSAT at this point. But our business school will accept your LSAT score in place of, because we can put in, there's tables for everything. So we can come up with a calculator and it spits out what your equivalent GRE or GMAT would be, even though they're radically different tests. There are several institutions that have moved for law school to strictly accepting the GRE and the GMAT. If you look through LSAC, the owner of law school admissions, they actually just posted some information about more schools accepting the GRE. So you could pursue that, but it is going to be definitely school specific. So any other questions, Katie?
That's the only one. I just encourage the students to put your questions in the question and answer box would be great moving forward.
Yeah, excellent. So let's jump into the application process. What are the important things that you need to know? First and foremost, please, for all things that are great, research your program. Everything can be found by a Google search. You're welcome to email us at any point and ask questions, but I really, really encourage you to do your homework and research the program. So much of graduate school and even the graduate school admissions process is how well you follow directions, right? And we see so many students that are automatically removed from consideration simply because they didn't follow the directions that were outlined on a website. People will reach out to us. I get literally hundreds of messages a day asking about application requirements, and we're sending them links and answering their question, obviously, but check out the website, research your program. Research scholarship opportunities. So different schools, again, going back to the funding, different schools will offer different scholarships, assistantships, funding opportunities. You should still submit a FAFSA. Depending on the type of program you go into, you could be at the graduate level considered for federal community service aid work, so federal work study, essentially, to help offset some of the costs. Again, that's going to depend on the institution, how it's set up. There could be certain scholarships through the program, grants through the program, but when it comes to graduate school, you're really on your own for funding it, or working with the program. You're no longer getting federal monies for it, no more grants. You still fill out the FAFSA because that's how you get your federally backed loans. But that's unless the program or school is giving you money or you have outside scholarships, you have to find your own ways to fund them. Recommendations are really important, but it depends on the program. And you're not going to know the level in which a program takes recommendations serious or not. So in absence of knowing, take them all seriously. Speak with your professors, teachers, coaches, advisors, supervisors. Stay away from friends, stay away from family members, stay away from peers. I remember back when I was involved in Thon, I wouldn't have necessarily had my Thon chair write me a recommendation because that's not really how that works. But look for someone that can, we'll talk more about recommendations on later slides, but you want to take them serious. And like I said, we'll go into a little bit more detail. Prepare your personal statement or essays. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more in detail, but there's this idea in career development, 6 eyes, right? So on your resume or cover letter, so 6 eyes is 3 people. Have at least 3 people look at your personal statement or essay, and we'll go into some of the nuts and bolts of that. Prepare for tests if they're necessary. Some schools are test optional, but take the test seriously. One of the biggest factors, and I'll tell you this is the case for the LSAT and GMAT, this takes into account as well. The higher your LSAT score, the higher your GPA, the more scholarship you're going to get, right? It's basically a chart, X and a Y. Where do you fall? So the higher of both, the more money. So take them serious, if not just to get in, to help offset the cost. And then wait to hear the response via email, generally, is how you're going to hear. If you go through an application portal, you'll typically get an automated message saying you have an update. That's how our system works. You may get a letter in the mail to offset, but a lot of things are handled electronically now. If there's a timeline, again, this goes back to researching the program. If there's a timeline listed on the website, abide by that timeline, right? So going back to clinical psychology, we've been getting inundated with emails because the application was the deadline was December 15th, right? We've been getting inundated with emails with people saying, when am I going to hear? I haven't heard anything. What's going on? Right on the website, it says On January 27th, you're going to hear if you're invited to an interview or not. Clear as day, right? So we send that link to folks, right? So look on the website, check it out, see what's going on there, and then wait to hear. You're going to hear from us. I promise you, you will hear one way or the other. We're not going to ghost anybody. So it is good to express interest, you know, and continue to follow up. A lot of systems that use, a lot of schools that use systems will say they have checklists. They'll let you know when you're complete. So you don't have to reach out and ask if you're complete. You can log in and check, right? So again, this is where that following directions comes into play. Katie, go ahead.
Or what exactly are the differences between research and professional masters? Does it matter?
Yeah, so a research is going to take you more of the academic track. So you would think of, you would also think of how a program is set up. So if a program is set up with a thesis, right, if that's part of the experience, that may be more of an academic track, a research track, if you will. If there's a practicum or capstone as part of the program, that's going to be more professional because it's setting you up to make an impact in something. You could also look at the type of program. A great example for us is our history program. We have a master's in history and we have a master's in public history. The master's in history is a academic program, right? It's there to take you further in your academics, get your doctorate, write a book, do a lot of research, talk about a specific thing. Our public history is designed for those that want to work in cultural trusts. They want to work in museums. They want to work in historical societies, telling the story of history, right? Getting it out there. So that, like from a liberal arts standpoint, that's a differentiation between the two. Typically, when you're thinking about professional versus academic, business schools, law schools, med schools, those are typically your professional schools. And then really everything else falls in academic track, and you could take it one of many ways. And there are some variations with that, and I'm not sure what Smil has. If they, you know, with a business school, you could pursue a PhD in organizational behavior, for instance, right? Which would take you an academic route, but you're typically coming into that after some experience. So there's a whole lot of answers to this question. But anything else?
No, that was, oh, wait, one just popped in.
Okay, sure.
What advice would you have for students trying to narrow down their options? For this student, I feel like there are just so many schools to consider and the search process gets overwhelming and confusing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are like 3,500 schools in the country. And with that, you know, I mean, Duquesne has over 90 graduate programs. I mean, Penn State probably has like 300 graduate programs, right? So absolutely. I think if you don't know what you want to do for grad school, don't go to grad school. It's an expensive place to find yourself. Go get a job. Go go to the Bank of America building, go wherever, start going to the career fairs, get a job, learn what you like and what you don't like from a professional standpoint. If you know what you want to do from a grad school perspective, start thinking about where you want to be in 5 or 10 years, because you know, your grad school experience, the network that you build is in many cases going to be regional, right? So if you want to eventually make your way to the Carolinas, right? You're like, hey, I've always wanted to live in the Carolinas, right? Going to grad school in upstate New York might not be the best approach, right? So start looking geographically, where do I want to be? Frankly, that was my own journey to grad school. I was talking, you know, I met my wife at Penn State. She was at Duquesne's law school, and I was working in North Jersey for the railroad, Norfolk Southern, and I said, hey, I need a change. Where do I want to be? So I applied to Penn State and Pitt because I knew I wanted to be in Pennsylvania, as close to Western PA as possible, and I wanted that big, you know, bigger school experience. So I landed at Pitt. But I would say if you have no clue, don't go to grad school, go find a job, any job. If you know what you want to do, start thinking geographically. There's going to be a lot of similarities between the programs, right, academically. But what kind of school experience do you want? All right, so you came from Penn State. Do you want a smaller liberal arts campus? Do you want to be in a small environment? Maybe, maybe not. Start thinking about that. That'll cross some schools off your list. Do you want another experience like you've had at Penn State where you got, in that case, you using North Carolina as the Carolinas as an option, UNC, Wake Forest, USC, right? Maybe that's the environment that you want to go into, but there's a lot of ways to narrow that down. I saw a bunch of things pop in.
Yes, we have some really great questions coming in. We're up to
Yeah.
5 right now. So while testing has become optional, would taking the GRE or the GMAT or any other test benefit the student in applying if it's optional?
So if it's test optional, it can, if under a couple circumstances, if you're trying to offset a deficit. So maybe you have a 3.0 GPA and you need a higher GPA to get in, but you score like a 310 on your GRE, which is a pretty good score. Well, that would offset your GRE or your lower GPA. But if you score a 280 on the GRE and you have a 3.0, it's not going to help you, right? So I think you want to be very cognizant of that, and just know the type of program. If they don't ask for it, don't submit it, right? I mean, if you really think it can help you or you really think you need it and it's test optional, give it a go. Some programs, I guess I should say for this, you will need it for funding because, those funded positions are tied to assistantships or research. So they want a higher caliber. So, it may be test optional or not required for general admissions, but it may be required for funding. So I apologize for neglecting to mention that earlier, but that is something to take into consideration.
How do master's degrees fit into someone looking at a PhD? I've heard the term milestone master. Is that how it usually works? And I think this kind of goes into the next question, which is specifically for psychology. Do you recommend going to a master's route first and apply to a doctoral program second? So where does a master's program fit into the next track of PhD?
Yeah, so a lot of programs, so one, it's going to depend on the institution, right? So if it's an R1, really big R1 research, a place like Penn State, you may need a master's in order to pursue it. That's going to be discipline and field specific. In many cases, you can apply straight away to a PhD directly from an undergrad or work and then applying, from there. The milestone masters, I've not really used that term, but if I'm tracking with you here, that is typically, a master's is typically built into a doctoral program. So your first 2 years, you're typically taking master's type of work. And then you sit for what they call qualifying exams, or you submit your defense papers and your research topic and all that to put you on the PhD track. If you don't pass your qualifying exams, or if you don't have the grades or what's necessary to continue the PhD track, you'll typically leave the program, but with a master's degree. It's kind of like consolation prize, just to be blunt. So that's really where those things shake out. Again, you want to research the program. Like my doctoral program, because it's a professional program, requires a master's degree and X amount of years experience to get into it. But typically PhDs, they're going to bring in a combination of people with masters, without masters, with experience, without experience. In the case of psychology, I would probably, again, just speaking candid to my fellow liberal arts folks here, it's really not going to serve you any good to get a master's in psychology, because you can't do anything with it. You can't get licensed to be a psychologist with it. It's going to teach you some coursework and may help you get into the PhD, but you're then going to be repeating all the same classes through the PhD. So you're going to be putting out X amount of dollars, anywhere from probably, on the low end, if you're lucky, 30 or 40, up to probably 100,000 for a master's degree, in the hopes that you get into one of these programs. I would probably recommend, again, going back to the earlier conversation, maybe you look at a clinical mental health counseling type degree, a counseling degree, which you could later turn into a PhD in psychology, but you may find that you find your passion with clinical psychology, right? And clinical counseling, excuse me, and you find that that does what you need it to do. So I would say, if you're pursuing a master's in the hopes of getting into a doctorate later, pursue a master's that you can actually do something with, and that you can get some results out of.
Great. You talked about this a little bit before, Dave, with the professional studies versus academic master's programs. Some of the graduate schools have School of Professional Studies. Is it different compared to other programs, such as an undergrad with business of art, Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor's of Science in the grad school?
Yeah, so those are just the way colleges structure from an administrative standpoint. So that's how can a school fit as many programs into one place so that you don't have to hire more administrators to oversee them? That's what a lot of those come to. I mean, we've talked about that at Duquesne, even how do we create a college of graduate studies, right, and just house everything under it. So you can really worry less about those kind of things. Typically, your professional, the School of Professional Studies, the School of Graduate Studies, those are generally going to be your liberal arts type of programs, or really just your random sampling of graduate programs. Where does a program not make sense? Like for instance, we have a computer science program that lives within our liberal arts college. Why does it live there? Because we have our undergrad math and computer science program that's housed there, and we don't have an engineering or CS school. So it landed there, right? So that's just sort of how some of those things shake out. I wouldn't put too much thought into that. Find the program first.
I'm going to go with the 3 questions we had remaining, and then we can move on to the next slide and I'll come back. But I love these questions, guys. You did a great job.
Great questions.
So this one, how important is it for someone wanting to be a psychologist? I think, if I'm reading this correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, to the student who asked this question, a therapist who wants to work with vets with PTSD or anxiety, how important is it to go to graduate school if they want to work in an avenue of help?
Yeah, so you're going to have some sort of counseling degree. And so the counseling degree allows you to sit and do your supervised hours to get your licensed professional counseling degree. Working with vets, if you're coming from a military background and you want to sort of apply this and help this, or that's going to help, but you're going to need the licensure to actually do that. You could do it from a volunteer standpoint, working, but not in an official capacity. I don't think you don't need a PhD in clinical psychology to do that. That's where a licensed professional counselor would come into play. That's what a lot of therapists are. They're there to help you talk through work through those challenges, come up with those strategies. So I would generally probably first and foremost look at like clinical mental health counseling. Like you hear clinical mental health counseling, and it may have a certain stigma to it, but that's really just a broad field that a lot of counselors go into and come out of. So.
Next question is about picking your program. Is it better to study in a broader field such as sociology, rather than a specific subcategory. When it comes to looking for jobs and careers after graduation, this particular student is stuck between sociology and political science, and is afraid that poli-sci is too specific and maybe limiting afterwards.
Um, well, definitely not. So political science and sociology, well, first, they're very different, right? So that's first and foremost. But I would ask you what you want to, you don't have to answer this, right, because of the format, but what do you want to do? Do you want to work in DC drafting policy, or do you want to study the human experience, right? If you want to work in DC drafting policy, like I used to work for a policy school, that's what I did at CMU. That's going to be a lot of analytics, a lot of statistics, and a lot of writing. Is that the environment you want to be in, or do you want to, do more of a program evaluation, right? You can do that with sociology. So how does someone's experience with a certain policy impact the way the policy is developed further, right? You could do that with sociology, but I think you're going to have a tougher time getting into a job than with a political science degree. Poli-sci is not just, reading a law, briefing on it, and talking about it. There's a lot that goes into the impact of the policy, the data, the evaluation, the funding aspects of it. So again, I think it goes back to where you want to be long term. But again, it's also going to be program specific. So policy programs are very, very unique, and schools are very unique, right? So if you want to be if you want to be in the front lines, in the trenches, you might want to go to frankly, you might think this is crazy, more of the Ivy League that's going to give you the network. If you really want to be, I used to work at Carnegie Mellon in the Heinz College, right? So that's a great school if you really want to enact change and be that change agent, because they're going to give you a toolkit to come out. University of Chicago is the same way. Penn State's the same way, right? So you're going to come out with a certain skill set to enact any sort of policy. Now, if you want to go in and work on food policy, I'd say go out to University of Washington, right? Because there are certain schools that have certain niches. International policy, go up to NYU or Tufts or something, right? So some of that kind of stuff. So you want to do your homework on that.
I'm going to do one more question. It associates with this application process slide right now, and we can move ahead to the next one.
Okay.
But this particular student, yes, we have a gap year event later this week. It's on Thursday. I will be hosting that one as well. But what is a good timetable to apply to graduate programs during that gap year or gap years?
Yeah, don't take too much time unless you're working, right? So this might be a taboo subject, but I'm personally not a fan of gap years unless you're doing something very tangible with the gap year. It's just delaying, right? You're either delaying earning a salary, gaining experience, or you're delaying grad school. The more you delay grad school, the more expensive it gets. Tuition costs go up. So think very critically about gap years, just from my vantage point. Your timetable for applying is generally going to be August through December. That's going to be when most schools are opening their applications. Doctoral programs are going to be the earlier ones. So that's typically deadlines are November into December. And then master's programs are going to roll through current into the March timeframe. A lot of schools will offer rolling admissions for master's programs, but doctoral programs are really hard and fast. So, if you're pursuing them, I would say really by mid-December, I would say by December 1st, you should have all of your information, contacts, everything in order for a doctoral application. Masters can generally push a little bit further, but it doesn't hurt to get them in early. So.
Great, thanks. And I think thinking about number 3 for the recommendations, you
Yeah.
need to keep that relationship alive to be
Absolutely.
able to ask for that during that gap year. So thank you.
Yeah, so we'll jump through some of these. I want to be mindful of the time. We've got about 18 minutes left. This went very quickly. Great questions, by the way. So the materials that you'll need, generally you're going to be filling out an online application, follow that through any website. Remember your logins, remember your contact information, get into there. A lot of places will require official transcripts for your application to be reviewed. Because of COVID, some allowed unofficial transcripts, but a lot of that flipped back. Like Duquesne, we require the official for review. If you're a current student, obviously what this will mean is you'll be sending an official transcript now. And then if you're admitted, once you graduate prior to enrolling, you'll send a final transcript. I just ordered my own transcripts a year ago from Penn State. It took a day. I was on the phone with the registrar at Penn State last week for a current Penn State student applying to Duquesne. There was a mix up with their name. Transcript came over within minutes, right? It goes through a system. We've got an agreement, comes over really quick. So I think it's like $5 to order the transcript, which goes into the last point at the bottom. We don't require an application fee. A lot of schools do require an application fee, so do be mindful of that and budget for that accordingly. They can be anywhere from $50 up to $200, $250. So check on that. Some schools will offer waivers at certain points in the year, so you want to be tracking that. Sometimes if you attend an event, attend a session, a webinar, they'll offer a waiver for attending as ways to boost their applications. Test scores we talked about, recommendation letters we talked about, essays we talked about, credential evaluations. If there's anyone on here that has attended an institution, an international school at some point, not study abroad, right? Study abroad will show up on your Penn State transcript. Don't worry about any of that. But if you actually studied for any duration internationally, you'll need to have a transcript evaluation done. And there's directions on our website, and many schools have that. Then writing samples, portfolios, auditions, depending on the field that you're going into, any variation of that, but it'll be an original work, original to you, that will display, what you want to go into, what you're capable of, so on and so forth. And then an interview. The interview, not to be scared of, they're really just assessing fit and getting to know you, right? So grad school, really, it's not just about what you can do. It's about, do you fit the culture of a program? And that's determined, just like with a job, you want to learn about them and they want to learn about you. I would still dress professionally for the interview, but don't stress over them. Recommendations, we have talked a bit about this. I'll let you read through this slide. The point that I want to make is be mindful of who you're asking for recommendations, especially if they're in the same department. And I'm drawing to the last, the bolded. Don't send duplicate recommendations with different signatories. What I mean by this is talk to your recommenders about an original letter. Sometimes faculty are very busy and a department will have a form letter that they send, and it'll just say, Dave Fortner was in my Psych 101 class, got an A, and then the rest of it is the same template that everyone else uses. This will not negatively reflect on you, especially if it's coming officially. It just doesn't do you any justice, right? So again, this goes back to who you have be a recommender. You want someone that really knows you and that can speak about your strengths, and that isn't going to be tempted to just use a form letter. So be mindful of that. Recommendations, personal statements and essays. A couple things I'll point out on here is please don't write the same essay and just change the university or college. It's very, very easy to see that. Don't copy text from the university website. Don't pull in, direct quotes, especially in smaller schools. Believe it or not, we see this. That's why it's bolded. We'll see someone just copy and paste a paragraph about why one of our programs is great. And the faculty are frankly the ones that help write that content. So, they're seeing that. Don't plagiarize either. Please cite if you are pulling quotes from something, if you're pulling information. A lot of schools, especially bigger, more competitive schools, will run essays through plagiarism software. So we use Turnitin, and we've used that in the past. And you will be rejected. You won't know why, but you'll be rejected for plagiarism. So please don't do that. Do look for prompts. There are typically prompts on the website. Again, going back to that research part, look for the prompts. If there is no prompt and it just says, 250 words on why you want to be in this program, my recommendations are this. What brought you to this point where you want to pursue this degree? What experience do you have that will make you a good fit? And why should you attend this school? And again, this is where you don't want to be using just the same essay. You want to make it personal about you, about the school, and about your goals. So look for those prompts. Financing your degree. So the difference between scholarship and assistantship. Scholarship is free money, right? So if you get a scholarship from a program, go you. Assistantship is something you're working towards, right? So, and that may come in different forms. It may not be a paycheck. It may be, we're going to forgive 9 credits a year in lieu of you working 20 hours a week, right? So you get a tuition based on or you get a discount of your tuition based per credit. It could be a graduate assistantship, which covers full tuition and gives you health insurance and other benefits and a stipend. It could be that. So you really want to look into assistantship. We at the graduate level use assistantship broadly. That could be a TA, it could be a teaching assistantship, could be research, could be graduate assistantship, which means you work for the department as an administrative assistant. Right? Could be any number of things. But do your homework on that, because that's not even just a school thing. That is a program specific idea, concept that you need to dive into. On financing your degree, please consider the return on investment, right? So does it make sense for you to go and work for a few years and then do a degree part-time and have your employer pay for it? That might be, on the bottom, employer reimbursement. That might make the most sense for you and for your degree. This is where we get into that gap year where I'm, again, not a huge fan. Does delaying that give you the experience that you need, or does it set you backwards, right? Depending on what you do in a gap year, if you're, I remember there was a student I worked with who wanted to, he was trying to go to business school, but wanted to start a band. I mean, his thing was music, right? Took a semester off and then ended up coming back and saying, you know what, the music thing didn't work out. I need to get into grad school. And we worked with him. There was some of that flexibility. But how does that gap play into that long-term return on your investment? Are you working towards your graduate school, your professional goals? Are you just gigging, trying to figure, have some fun? Have fun now. College is a great time. School scholarships are typically merit-based versus need-based. You might find some special scholarships that are need or diversity-based, but generally they're going to be based on your merit. Assistantships we talked about. Outside scholarships are plentiful, but they are really hard to find. It takes a lot of legwork. So, you know, you can find them. You're just gonna, that's really on you. We don't have a big bucket of scholarships, unfortunately. I wish we did. Internships, work studies, again, that's where the FAFSA was going to come in. Some programs will have federal community service work study options. Some won't. But that also allows you to put you in a pool where you can try to get something on campus, possibly, to help offset your costs. Employer reimbursements, and then loans. Loans are really the most common, starting with your graduate, you have grad plus loans, and then going into your private loans. Application deadlines, we talked a little bit about this. Do check for the program specific website, or the program websites for specific deadlines and times. Rolling admissions, the more competitive a school, the more strict the deadlines will be. Again, thinking of that R1, the bigger schools. But even with that, some will push and give some flexibility with it. If you reach out, if you're making progress towards completion, and you say, hey, listen, I'm making progress. Dave is just not getting back to me on my recommendations, but I'm going to try again. Just let us know that, and we'll work with you. If you're just starting your application on the deadline, you've got a lesser chance of having that flexibility. So prepare ahead. I guess that's it. That's all we had. There's our email, gradadmissions@duq.edu. You can reach out anytime. We can get back to you. And I do know there were some more questions, but I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. You asked a lot of great questions. And, you know, if not Duquesne or Penn State, I hope you are able to pursue your graduate goals.
Thank you so much, Dave. Yes, we have a couple questions and a couple more coming in. So one of them is based on prerequisites for graduate school. This particular student was told by an advisor during his time here at Penn State that he should have STAT 200 to enter any grad school.
What's STAT 200?
STAT 200. I'm sorry. Statistics.
Okay.
Statistics. Yes. I'm sorry. Do you think that is true? That statistics is required for most all grad schools, and should they take it, or is that program specific?
So absolutely program specific.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going into an English program, you don't need statistics, but if you're going into marketing, you might need STAT 200, right? So it is going to be program specific. Absolutely.
The student mentioned international affairs or international politics, and obviously research-based statistics is going to be a good tool to have in your pocket.
So that's really going to be institution specific as well. So again, if you're going into a program that is more data based and analytics based, you're absolutely going to need advanced math, advanced statistics, possibly some programming as well, Python or Java, right? I mean, that's just the reality of even going into a poli-sci or international affairs degree that is more technical. But if you're going into more of a theory-based kind of international policy program, then I mean, stats is really not going to, if you had a STAT 100, which I think most do from a gen ed standpoint, you're going to be fine. But it will come down to how you did, right? If you got a C in STAT 100, that's not going to serve you well. You might want to take another stat class. But if you got an A or B in STAT 100, that's really the baseline. Even at CMU, when we were admitting for our policy program, as long as you had STAT 100, you were an A or B in it, that satisfied our minimum requirement. Our data analytics program required a bit more, but that was more on the math side. So.
Easy question for me to answer. Is this being recorded? Yes, this is being recorded, as are all of our liberal arts career events. You can find them on our YouTube channel. It would be at the College of the Liberal Arts, Penn State College of Liberal Arts. And then there's a Career Enrichment Network channel. I will answer this question and ask the next one and try and pop that link into the chat as well. So, but definitely recorded and available. Oh, I hope I didn't just delete a question. They're coming in fast.
I'll stop sharing for now.
Okay, great. Okay, next question. I love this question, Erin. What are ways to figure out cultural fit with a program before applying?
Absolutely. Ask to talk to a current student, 100%. Programs will allow that. They encourage that. That's going to be your best way. Look at a couple things to consider with, visiting the campus. If you have the availability, the time, the means, I do encourage you to visit campus, meet with the faculty. Consider, very, very honestly, look at how a school responds to you via email, via your questions, via your outreach and asking to connect. If they're really slow to respond, if they're really sort of passive with it, that's going to tell you a little bit about their culture, right? If they're responsive, if they're engaging, if they're really excited, that tells, first impression, our first impression is going to be email. But talk to them. One thing I did neglect to put in here when considering the program, and this goes a little bit to culture, but more to your fit in a program, is look at their career outcomes, right? So the person that was just talking about, like the international, if you're going, or even the person before, policy and sociology, ask where their recent graduates have gone, ask what their career statistics are, what types of jobs that folks are getting out of the program. If you're not seeing something that aligns with what you want to do, please don't go in with the false assumption that you can just make it work, right? Because programs are typically, what you see is what you get, right? As far as outcomes go. So, you in some cases, it's great to be a trailblazer, right? And build that. But take very seriously where folks are going with the degrees that they're getting and make sure that your interests align with those.
Great, thank you. We have a couple more questions, and I know we're at 2:30. Dave, I want to be cognizant of your time. Are you still good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Yeah,
great,
absolutely.
Thank you. I have 4 questions left, and 3 are very psychology specific. I think I mentioned to Dave before our session that I work with a lot of psychology students. So I think I'm going to just jump to this one more base question. Does ranking matter when it comes to grad schools?
So ranking for psychology?
No, ranking in general, and then we'll get back to these 3 psychology questions. Yeah.
Does ranking matter? That is a loaded and tricky question. Ranking can matter from a reputation standpoint and what types of employers recruit from there. But more so if you look at US News and World Report as rankings, the way US News and World Report is the rankings come out is by peer institutions evaluating each other. So that's how US News is based, right? Princeton Review is student surveys and student things like that, right? So I wouldn't put a ton of stock in rankings. What I would tell you, again, this goes into those outcomes. Look at where folks are going, what job placement rates are like, what kind of employers they're getting. This goes back to the geographic sort of component. If you want to be in the Carolinas and you want to go to a school in upstate New York, do they have any alumni presence there? Do they have any connection there? So I would say looking beyond just the rankings would be a really important thing. Do rankings matter? I'll tell you they do, but it's going to depend on the program that you're going into, and it's going to depend on who you're talking with as well.
Okay. I'm going to combine these 2 questions, and you've talked a little bit about this specifically to psychology and the master's versus PhD
Sure.
Debate.
Sure.
So the first one is, the student wants to become a clinical therapist, do you suggest getting a master's degree in psych or clinical therapy program? The second one being they're interested in a master's program, a clinical mental health master's program in marriage and family master's program. Do they need a PhD or would a master's degree be enough?
Yeah, so for the marriage, couple, family, like we have that program at Duquesne. That's all you'll need. Like you don't need to necessarily go beyond. Really, the PhD in, I mean, frankly, we know some clinical psychologists that are ABD, all but dissertation. So they've done all the coursework, they have the license, right? But they just didn't take that final step. And that's really because, so a clinical psychologist is really working more in the academic, the research side of psychology, and also seeing patients and working with clients and things like that. I would say, again, clinical psychology is one of the hottest programs out there, absolutely bar none. But again, it's also very, very competitive to get into. And I would say, look at the programs, look at the outcomes, look at the methodology and the pedagogy that the faculty use. Does that align with where you want to be from a career standpoint? Because again, you may very well get to where you want to be with a career standpoint with a counseling degree versus a PhD in clinical psychology. Now, again, you can always go back later and get that. Pardon me. Or another way to look at this, again, I mentioned school psychology briefly. We have a program at Duquesne. We have a PsyD and a PhD in school psychology. So if you want to work in the K through 12 arena, very similar to the work done in clinical psychology, but it's more around an academic setting. Some of the students that maybe are not admissible to our school psych program right away are offered admission to our child psychology program as a way to test run and test pilot it, right? And then you do some time in there, and then you apply before you even finish, and then the credits transfer, right? So we have some of that availability, but that's going to be program specific. But I really encourage. A lot of folks talk to us about clinical psychology and was great. What do you want to do with that? Well, I want to be a psychologist. Great. What does that actually mean to you? Right. So I would start there, define, look at what you want to do, get in touch with some folks, like use the network, shadow, do some informational interviews, talk to some people with clinical mental health counseling background, LPCs as they were, licensed professional counselors, and talk to some clinical psychologists. See which path you like the most. I think I started with grad school once, started a social work program for about 7 days and realized this was not my jam. It's okay, but I wish that was in 2007, right after I left Penn State. I wish that I would have known to do a little bit more homework and investigation earlier, because I would have been on a better track sooner. So advice to my younger self.
I would also share with all the students who are still here, the Alumni Mentor Program is a great opportunity to talk to someone like Dave, an alumni of the college who's in clinical psychology or LPC. We have over 800 alumni who are just waiting to be mentors in our program. So you'll find that on our website too, to apply for.
I would say if you do that, please engage your mentor. From past experience, please engage and respond.
Yes, that's important. Oh, I don't like hearing that.
No, all good things. It's important to engage. We want to help. That's why we're here.
Yes, definitely. I have one more psychology-based one, and the student is a senior and feels they've missed the deadlines for the doctoral programs in psychology now. And unfortunately, there's a lot of truth to that. What do you recommend I do? And I do when I have no other choice but to do a gap year. You mentioned applying to master's, focusing on what I want, and they want counseling in hopes of getting into the doctoral program. But are there other options to help build build up to applying to a PhD. And I'm just going to share with the student, please make an appointment with us in the office in the Career Enrichment Network. We're here specifically for liberal arts students, and we do career coaching all the time. I have 12 appointments tomorrow, so I would love to meet with you and take advantage of those resources there. But Dave,
yeah, absolutely, Katie. That 12 is a busy day.
I don't know how it happened.
For this individual, yes, in many cases, for a program that you really want to get into, you've probably missed the deadlines, but don't fret. Don't consider it a gap year either. Look for gainful employment. Consider, they're not glamorous roles, but they give you an insight into the world, maybe like a therapeutic support staff, TSS, working with social services in some way, working in a counseling, a health and wellness sort of environment. You don't have to be in a counseling role to have an impact in that world, but something that's going to give you exposure. Something like a TSS might be a good option to get into. A lot of those are typically short term. They're stressful roles, but if you want to be in this field, it'll give you a really good insight into what the long-term successes can be. But no one would look at that and say, if you did a year as a TSS, that's a big year, right? So no one would look at that and be like, oh, they bounced out really quickly, right? That's how those roles work. So look for something that's gainful and that's working towards it, not just hitting pause.
I would say too, with our recruiting week next week, we have 2 organizations that you might be interested in talking to. The one being the Meadows Psychiatric Center, as well as the Community Service Group, is a Pennsylvania-wide organization that has those type of entry-level positions too. So feel free to email me if you're having any issues with registering, but those could be great opportunities for post-grad.
Yeah, there are tons of those, and they're always hiring. And frankly, I've seen some stuff around in Pittsburgh. We have like the Bradley Center, Holy Family Institute out in Western PA, and their salaries have gone up significantly. So you can take advantage of that.
For sure. I'm going to end on this question. If you have anything in addition to mention about Ivy League schools, special advice to those applications.
To the Ivies, yeah. We used to work quite a bit with the Ivies. Competed when I was at CMU with a lot of the Ivy schools. That's where test scores and experience is really going to matter. GPAs are really going to matter a lot. The network, doing the visits, going up there. So a lot of the Ivies and those more, like a top 25 kind of school, it will benefit you by setting up and traveling and doing some of those visits so they get to know you, meet with the faculty. It's going to be tough to get on their schedule. I can tell you that just from having worked with a lot of those faculty, but try to engage with the school. That's going to be your best route. Beyond, really when you're at that level, we are really looking at, putting my CMU hat on when we were recruiting there for the policy school, which again, we competed with Harvard and Princeton and Stanford and all these folks. Your professional experience, those internships that you've done, that volunteer time that you've done, hugely important. Your academics, hugely important. They will take test scores into account, and any leadership opportunities that you've had are really going to be looked at, frankly, far more than we look at Duquesne, right? So the Ivies are looking for really the whole package. And in some cases, like at Duquesne, we're looking to see, do you have the academics and do you have the interest in the field? Great, then you're admissible, right? I mean, that's the reality. They're looking for a much more in-depth fit.
Thank you so much, Dave, and thank you so much for your extra time. And for the third of the students that are still here, thank you. And I'm so glad we were able to record for those who had to leave us early and who couldn't make it. So great information, Dave. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for joining and coming around today. Feel free to reach out. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Dave Fortna. My picture's there.
Yes. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you at the next event.
Thank you.